Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Itachi was interested in having a child. Petunia performs a bit of accidental magic. It says something about her parenting that Uchiha Itachi is considered a better prospect for raising a child. Young Hari is raised by one of the most infamous Nuke-nin of all time and a cadre of uncles whose cumulative effect is very prominent. And someone had the bright idea to bring him back to England. Merlin helps them all. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 36, Training with Kabuto. Or, my spleen is supposed to be inside. Uchiha Sasuke was unhappy. There were plenty of reasons for this, but somehow, they managed to link up to his brother. It wasn't that his brother was the cause of all bad things, just that these seemed to be his fault, since all of them were because of his nephew, and therefore his brother. What was worse was that his brother was only partially at fault, so in the end, it was the whole clan that had made his life difficult. A year ago, he'd been approached by some of the strangest freaks of nature he'd ever encountered, and he lived in a village with Mato Guy. They had informed him that if he wanted to make use of the tattoo, he tried not to think about a 50-year-old biting him and cooing about it any more than he had to on his neck. He would need to come with them to the creepy pervert's place to learn from him. Since his best friend and adopted cousin was set to head out of the village anyway to be trained by one of the sages, no less Sasuke had decided that he'd kill 2 genin with 1 shuriken and learn from Orochimaru, while carefully avoiding any advances. Not being stupid, he decided to confide in his friend that he, Sasuke, was going to be betraying the village in the morning and he, Naruto, should be ready to deal with that, and that he, Naruto, would be acting head of the clan until he, Sasuke, got back. He, Sasuke, had started clarifying that bit about whom he, Sasuke, referred when Naruto started getting really confused. In his, Naruto's, defense, it was a fair thing to get lost on. It had been awkward to deal with Sakura on his way out though. He couldn't explain that he wasn't really leaving for good, so he'd been disturbed when she'd asked to come along. That had annoyed him enough that he'd kicked her very hard somewhere rather rude and knocked her out in the middle of the street. With any luck, it would teach her not to betray the village. Sasuke hadn't seen what had happened during the hunt to catch him, but from what the Sound 4 had explained, Jirobo had managed to catch the entire retrieval team in some sort of rock formation which Naruto had responded to by pulling so much chakra out that the Sound Ninja had been forced to abandon the technique and make a break for it. After that, reports got rather confused. Sasuke had failed to enlighten his new friends on the abilities of his fellow Uchiha, so they had been left trying to explain the 1,000 Naruto that had overrun the forest looking for them. To Sasuke's amusement, it had done nothing to convince Sound that Naruto was a threat, since the clones mostly got in each other's way and managed to prevent any of the Leaf Ninja getting anywhere near the Sound 4. He'd known his friend was a good actor, but this had been utterly ridiculous. Sasuke was amazed at how Naruto managed to perfectly sell the utter incompetence and completely prevent a single casualty. No one even twisted an ankle. It had been a bit weird though, when he'd been watching the tail end, since he'd been doing it while standing at the top of the Uchiha Madara statue in the Valley of the End. Actually, what had been weird was that his eyes had stung like hell, and he'd had giant hands on his back. They hadn't even been useful hands, though blighting was kind of cool, but he'd have preferred ones that could form hand seals or hold things. Then had come the mixture of frustrations upon discovering that most of his instruction would come from Kabuto, and upon discovering that Kabuto had plenty to teach. The boy was horribly emotionless and somehow cheerful at the same time, all the while demonstrating a broad variety of ways to maim and kill those of nominally greater skill. His instructor also had what could best be described as an insane idea of how to learn stealth techniques. Kabuto had ordered him to ambush Orochimaru. It took almost a day to understand that Kabuto was serious about the matter, and only 10 seconds to understand how much it hurt. The other thing about Kabuto was that he had some freakishly good skills at certain parts of medical techniques. He spent quite a lot of time that first month healing Sasuke's various internal organs after they had been shredded by a sage who wasn't good at being surprised. Unfortunately, Kabuto's skills didn't include pain management. On the rare occasions that he paid much attention, Orochimaru was a capable teacher, but Sasuke always wondered if the man was focused on lessons or on, well, Sasuke. It was creepy. Especially talking about his body. But the man was brilliant in a sort of razor-sharp way, and gave ample proof that he had genuinely been a contender for Hokage if it hadn't been for the whole creepy pervert megalomaniac thing. Sasuke had been amused when Kabuto had actually been shocked by a change in wardrobe. Having decided that the Uchiha, as they had been, were insane and generally unpleasant, Sasuke had decided that things like pointless, stubborn pride weren't so useful, although given that he'd brought Naruto into the clan, there was a good chance that was going to stay a family trait, and so he'd exchanged the purple and white garb that he'd been provided with for an outfit made of black and dark orange. He knew only one person who seemed to treat infiltration against highly skilled assassins as a form of recreation to prevent boredom, and had adopted his best friend's method for avoiding detection. That hadn't been enough to actually surprise Orochimaru, but it was enough that Kabuto was pleased with his progress and had focused more heavily on all the wonderful ways to inflict horrible injuries on other people. Sasuke wasn't sure where Kabuto had learned, but they were obviously crazy, since the boy's idea of teaching was to grievously wound Sasuke, and then heal him, and have him try to do it back. Thanks to the Sharingan, it was working, and sometimes, he even dodged, but it was still painful as hell and probably a bad sign that this was considered an acceptable training technique in sound. The Sound Four were a perpetual thorn in his side. He couldn't stand a single one of them. They all had serious problems, and this was Sasuke saying it. And they had somehow taken it as a personal offense that he was trained by Kabuto and Orochimaru, who refused to explain why he continued to employ four annoying pests as his elite bodyguard when Kabuto and Kimimaro would make better choices, and generally didn't like him. He was forced to put up with not Choji's complaints, not Tadurime's chattering attempts at backhanded humor, not Kiba's attempts to give him orders, and makes me long for Sakura's profanity-filled rants and violent assaults, although it was nice that in sound he was allowed to just stab her if she tried to hit him. He had enjoyed the look on her face when he'd accused her of being hot and cold. Kagaya Kimimaro had been a great help in his medical training by acting as a dummy for some of the more esoteric instruction, that was to say, the things that Kabuto didn't teach him, by horribly maiming him repeatedly until he could replicate the healing technique being demonstrated on some random missing nin who'd had the misfortune of being near wherever it was Kabuto looked for the poor bastards. Sasuke had been trying to get Kabuto to reveal who had trained him, since he planned to do the world a favor and kill the crazy fuck before anyone else was so scarred by this training method. Actually, Sasuke had been planning to kill quite a few people in sound, too. Kabuto was somewhere at the top of that. Then he'd been training on his own for once. Kabuto had been doing something and Sasuke really didn't want to know what that boy considered important, and he'd heard that voice just as his Sharingan showed him that in a second, he would be unconscious, and before he had a chance to dodge, he was. He had vague memories of bouncing on a shoulder through some of the labs he'd been ordered to stay out of on pain of whatever Kabuto could come up with. Since Sasuke had a pretty good idea of what that crazy bastard could come up with. The next thing he was certain of was lying on the desk of Tsunade, being stared at in confusion. And there was something in his mouth, and the ropes tying him felt really uncomfortable. He thought he was going to die when the owner of that voice, was that his nephew? Told Tsunade to tell the Hokage that Sasuke was back. Dear gods, he was expecting to be turned into a smear on the mountains outside. Everything became a blur for a while, probably out of protection for his mind by keeping him from remembering Sakura, but he remembered that there was a gift on his bed in the hospital. It was some sort of sturdy fabric outfit and a note from his nephew saying that he, Sasuke, should wear it so no one killed him before he, his nephew, was allowed to, which his father, Itachi, was sure to approve of any day. The worst part was that now he was being attacked by piles of paperwork that Naruto had been in charge of as head of the Uchiha. He got the feeling that this was supposed to be a punishment. He personally felt that having Sakura as his nurse was much more unpleasant. The girl took far too much enjoyment in doing regular checkups every hour. And he had yet to hear back about his complaint that full body checks were not necessary at each of these. If he found her attractive, this might qualify as a pleasant experience, but he just didn't find the girl attractive. If pressed, he'd have dithered on what he did find attractive, since his exposure to pretty girls was rather limited in Sound, where everyone was a freak, but he'd probably named that instructor from the exams except that she clearly had a bit of a snaky feel to her, and he didn't really want anything like Orochimaru near his groin. How Naruto had kept on top of course, that lucky bastard tossed shadow clones around like they were party favors. His best friend and adopted cousin was infuriatingly able to deal with all of this crap. And from what Tsunade had said to him when she visited, Naruto had single-handedly, and from outside the village, done more to annoy pretty much everyone who needed annoying than anyone ever had. Tsunade was almost gleeful about some of the things Uchiha Naruto had managed. On the other hand, her litany of complaints about some of the laws Naruto kept proposing. They pretty much all had to do with broth with noodles in. Kakashi had been aggravating as well, with his admonishments about abandoning Leaf. It wasn't as though Sasuke could have told anyone the truth, and not had it get back to Orochimaru. Besides, he was learning a lot from Kabuto and Orochimaru on those rare times he could be bothered to help teach. And there was no way he wanted to deal with running the Uchiha until Naruto was back and could officially be adjutant. After trying to sneak up on Orochimaru, a couple of ANBU wasn't really much of a challenge, all things considered. Outtake. The guest instructors ==. Class, said Hari, apparently unaware of the giant man with blue skin and gills standing next to him. Today, we have a guest instructor. Kisame bowed slightly. I am Hazage Kisame, former member of the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist and current member of the terrorist organization known as the Akatsuki. He paused when Hari elbowed him in the side. Oh right. My name is Kisame Hashigake. Freaks. The seventh years blinked. I'm told you lot are an iguana level class, so I don't need to take it easy on you. Kisame looked at Hari. Why can't they be normal things? Like ANBU? The blue man turned back to the group. What do you want, waving hand boy? He pointed at a Muggleborn at the back of the room, using Samahata with the same casual ease that most teachers use a ruler. Do you perform alternative music with things like PVC pipes and stuff? Kisame blinked for a moment. Then he walked down the aisle of desks, picked up the boy absently, and began to leave the room. We're having class by the lake. Chop chop. Today, said Dumbledore, I want to thank our guest instructor, Professor Kisame Hashigake, for his demonstration of advanced water techniques. I'm sure we were all impressed by the entire lake leaping up as a gigantic shark and eating the giant squid. Except for Hagrid, who I really hope will stop complaining soon. On a similar note, I want to thank Ms. Jessup for her demonstration of the useful Muggle technique of mouth-to-mouth and reviving her classmate after he was held underwater by our guest for almost 3 minutes for asking a stupid question. Also, I did not know acromantula were possible to shred with just shark skin. I'm not sure this new method will catch on, but it was a fascinating study. Please don't come back. Chapter 37, He Has Spies. Hari. Pain walked onto the training field, idly watching his adoptive nephew bouncing around with weights approved by Mato Guy. The boy seemed to be taking a positive delight in throwing multiple A-rank techniques at the surrounding grassland, which was rapidly turning into a wasteland, and generally indulging in wanton destruction. Yes, Uncle Pain? Hari had just finished seeing what happened if he threw intelligent hard work into a pressure damage, and then kept adding more layers of pressure damage to the mix. Pain watched a crispy bird come plummeting from the sky, just missing his nose as the inferno grew further out of control, turning into a column of fiery tornado the width of, well, a bunch of space. One hand casually rose. Heavenly gaze of the omnipresent God. There was a distinct lack of sound as the entire thing didn't so much go out as simply vanish in an instant. I think you have caused the citizens enough distress for the day. I want to talk to you. All right. Hari began conjuring shadow clones and fighting them. I have come to a decision regarding your autonomy as a pseudo-operative of the Akatsuki. I'm going to get to go on missions? No. You're no longer allowed outside of the tower without an escort. And escort means a member of the organization's inner circle, an S-ranked ninja, Hari. And your clones do not count. Pain observed that his nephew was having the sensation of receiving the memory of being punched a moment before receiving it, and with it was getting the sensation of being about to be punched while also experiencing the moment of about to punch. 5 minutes ago . Pain? Pain looked up from his map of the world. He'd pushed a few things around and was consulting a sheaf of notes and making adjustments to his collection of figurines. The slug figure had been removed, although the fire hat now had a little sake bottle hanging off of a tassel. Yes, Sasori? Pain sounded frustrated, no doubt because he'd been spending the better part of an hour trying to work out why Waterfall had suddenly begun recalling military assets and had gone into a complete lockdown. I see you're holding this morning's intelligence report. Thank you for that insight. I think I might be able to explain the sudden change. Pain cocked his head. I'm going to regret this. Why? Well, the reports are unconfirmed, but... What happened? It appears that someone stole all of the hero water. Someone what? This is all hearsay, mind you. And I don't have any potential leads, but it's a matter of some concern that a major enhancement like that is now in play and Hari. I'm sorry. He said he needed to take a trip yesterday. I'm not sure how that. Something about getting together some stuff for school. And he mentioned that he was headed to Waterfall? He mentioned something about seeing the sights. Like the hero water? It would appear so. This is Hari, though he seems to have a knack for acquiring things he's not supposed to have. An admirable trait in a ninja. Not on this scale. Pain rubbed his face. So, the only good news is that we don't have to worry about Waterfall trying to declare war on us. No accurate descriptions or anything about that. What else? While no one was able to accurately describe the person involved, he or she was wearing a black cloak with red clouds on it. Of course. On the upside, without their hero water, Waterfall can't afford an engagement against us, even if we do employ their most wanted criminal. That's something. Up until now, that would have been Kakuzu. Thank you. Just trying to help, Pain. So that's a major village and 2 minor ones Hari has managed to annoy in the space of about 2 weeks? Sasori looked down at his wooden fingers and mumbled for a moment. Maybe more if someone was planning to hire Waterfall for something. Right. That's it. Pain stormed out of the room, leaving Sasori to stare at the map and wonder at the amount of damage a boy not even 13 could do. Even Itachi had waited until he was 13 and had only slaughtered a major clan, not potentially started multiple wars simultaneously. It just goes to prove what I've been saying about the right force in the right place, he murmured. Tsunade sat in the Hokage manor, staring at a report from Jiraiya. What she was reading couldn't possibly be true. Apparently, the old lech had actually cut short his whoring because of some incident he had to investigate. The sake wasn't helping either because things should be making more sense than that. Of course, there was the later report from Jiraiya that explained what the incident was. Apparently someone had made off with all of Waterfall's hero water. It wasn't clear if the village had a way of getting more without an extant sample, so it was possible that a minor village had been permanently crippled by the loss. She was having a debate with herself about whether or not she should tell Jiraiya that she knew who the perpetrator was. It could be that a random member of the Akatsuki decided to make off with a valuable and highly guarded substance without causing major casualties in the process, but somehow it seemed like exactly the kind of thing that her recent visitor would do, to judge from the stuff he'd done. Perhaps he'd thought he was being helpful? And it was only a question of whether her amusement at Jiraiya's confusion. How did the man not remember someone who'd featured so heavily in a report he wrote less than a year ago? Outweighed the importance to the village of having its spymaster fully up to date that was keeping her from enjoying a moment of relaxed smirking before returning to her mystification that Jiraiya had managed to leave a brothel early even for something as major as the theft of the hero water. Tsunade? Came a hesitant voice. Shizune, Tsunade sighed. What went wrong? What makes you think something went wrong? When I'm wearing this hat, you only call me by my name when you're trying to keep me calm while giving me bad news. Oh. Well, the thing is, we're not being invaded. I'm not drunk enough to miss that. Are you ever drunk enough? Sadly, no. Nothing has exploded beyond normal training. My apprentice hasn't killed a patient. Lee's weights haven't been stolen again. Ibiki finally managed to get the doors squeaking again, and gods did Mitarashi complain about rust creation duty. Speaking of which, Mitarashi didn't manage to kill anyone on her way to dumplings with sauce. Kakashi hasn't lost more porn. The memorial stone still stands. Guy hasn't decided to forego the way of youth. The academy is still full of students instead of future homicidal maniacs with PTSD. Oh wait, no, still normal. My sake hasn't run out. You haven't found a boyfriend. Yuhi and Sarutobi are still under the impression that they are subtle. My sake hasn't run out. The ANBU are still where they belong. And Jiraiya is probably still a pervert. What am I missing? Uchiha Sasuke left the village. Fuck. Uchiha Sasuke jogged down the road wearing the guise of a young man headed on an errand for his elderly granny. The ability to be someone other than himself had been a point that Kabuto had stressed, so Sasuke even had a small basket of treats for an old woman. He would use it to beat someone and steal his clothes a few miles away, and then be someone on the way to go fishing. Or maybe a traveling merchant. It depended what he found on the corpse. It was amusing how easy it was to evade ANBU after attempting to murder Orochimaru. Compared to the Snake Sage, ANBU might as well be civilians, which made sense, given the number of people who would like to have Orochimaru's head over their gates, starting with Sasuke and the ANBU he just evaded. He hoped that Kabuto would keep him appraised of how things went in Leaf. Given what the Hokage had been complaining about, his adopted cousin was incredibly inventive in ways to make use of the Uchiha name. It had been odd to see so many people wearing shirts with his family crest on it, and even odder to see the jewelry with the Uchiha fan, and don't get him started on the subject of the Uchiha trademark kunai. Most worrying had been the body pillows. Sasuke felt certain that his best friend was being corrupted by the ancient pervert who was training him, but Naruto was filling the Uchiha coffers with more money than ever. And then his crazy best friend was using that money to make more money and generally increase the family's actual political power. His short exposure to the tower pile of forms he'd needed to fill out, and the similarly daunting list of meetings he needed to hold and letters to be written had been enough to make him certain that he was better off leaving everything in Naruto's hands. In fact, it had been one of the chief reasons he'd decided to leave so soon. Until Naruto returned to Leaf, Sasuke had no intention of being the head of the clan, not while it meant he had to handle all that. So it was that he had a light heart at abandoning his home a second time, the teetering stacks of paperwork in his memory giving him a warm feeling with the knowledge that it wasn't his problem. I want a report from the commander of the ANBU about how a 13-year-old managed to evade them so thoroughly, Tsunade said as she pushed open the door to her office. And then someone send Naruto a letter saying that he's. The state of her desk slowly dawned on her. Shizune? Yes? Am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? That your sake pile has stacks of gleaming paperwork on it? Yes. Indeed, you are. Tsunade shielded her eyes as she approached. How did he manage to polish paperwork? I'm guessing with chakra, Tsunade. Tsunade threw a cancellation on the pile and sighed as the glow toned down to merely dim. This is all the paperwork for the Uchiha. He's even done a month in advance. That was most conscientious of Uchiha Sasuke to do that before he left. It's signed by Naruto. Oh. How did he manage that? Shizune opened her mouth. If you say with a brush, I will be most annoyed. Shizune's mouth closed. I mean, we haven't even announced it yet, let alone had enough time for the news to travel to. I think they're headed to Waterfall, so around there. The Hokage stormed over to the window and glared out at the village. For a time, she stared in silence at the people going about their business outside, apparently deep in thought. The ANBU commander stood at attention, wondering if he was going to have to explain a failure, or just die of old age. A nasty part of his mind pointed out that his leader was likely to do that first, and Shizune began to scuttle about, moving the paperwork to the appropriate people and muttering about how she could get a boyfriend if she wanted. I think I can explain how he got away, began the ANBU commander. He has spies? Hissed Tsunade. In my village. I don't think that's why, my lady. Not just spies. That isn't enough. Tsunade slammed a fist down on the windowsill, smashing it into splinters. He has clones spying on me. I don't think Uchiha Sasuke knows any clone techniques usable for spying, my lady. I gave him my necklace. How could he be so suspicious? The ANBU commander shifted uneasily. The last time he'd seen the missing boy, he'd not been wearing a necklace, and a perusal of his effects had not turned up any jewelry either. The 16 poison rings and various concealed weapons disguised as small items, including the 6 miniature daggers on chains and decorated with the Uchiha crest, didn't count. The boy was a ninja, after all. I want every ANBU member looking for him. Understood, my lady. The ANBU commander paused. This would normally be unthinkable, but he was already confused at the moment and wanted to make sure. I'll have them track down Uchiha Sasuke. What? Snapped Tsunade. Fuck that. Find Uchiha Naruto. I'll send a team to Waterfall to intercept. Not the real one. I'm sorry, my lady. His clones. Understood, my lady. It shall be as you will. The ANBU commander left the room in a panic. It was hard enough to find a single Naruto who wasn't learning the spy trade from Leaf's spymaster. Now he had to try and find at least one of many. In any other case, that would increase his odds that a team would turn something up, but Naruto had been dodging ANBU so long that the commander was fairly certain that having more of them would at best make them unable to find any of them, and at worst would result in the various clones aiding one another in evading his patrols. He was doomed. Outtake . Class, said Hari, today we have a guest instructor. He pointed to a hunchbacked figure with a mask over its face, and a freakish haircut that looked like someone had carved wood and glued it to his head. Greetings, class, the man's voice was like a cultured death rattle. I am Sasori of the Red Sand. I will be teaching you today about the ways your foe might try to attack you indirectly. A hand rose at the back of the room. Yes, Mr. Ashcroft? How did you know my name? I know more than that, Mr. Ashcroft. Do you want me to demonstrate? I just wanted to know why you don't have a family name. Because people remember me for living in the desert. And for leaving a trail of bodies in my wake, as well as the leveling of a small country in a single day. There was a lot of blood. Oh. We begin with how to deal with the blackmailing of a friend or lover. So I would like to thank our guest instructor, Dumbledore said from the head of the Great Hall. He looked at the misshapen form that appeared to be looking at the hall with its unblinking stare. I am sure that his lessons in how to handle counterintelligence issues are welcome. I know that we will all sleep less soundly in our beds knowing that anyone we trust can be easily suborned by someone with the right skills. Perhaps this will encourage you to sleep in your own beds for a change. I am similarly glad that we are all aware of the dangers of poison in everyday foodstuffs, and those toxins that can be used by less common methods. The fact that a dangerous topical paralytic looks just like common starch used for laundry is a bowel-looseningly terrifying one. I give 300 points to Mr. Potter for going to Diagon Alley to collect the bezoars needed to help with recovery from these lessons. I am sure that the house elves will be absolutely terrified when they go about their tasks that they are about to harm one of their charges. Please don't ever come back. Chapter 38, Negotiations. I guess that concludes them. Do you have everything packed? Asked Itachi. Hari looked down at the insides of his forearms. Yeah, Dad. I realize that this is silly, but did you pack the hero water? Of course. Good. It's just that Leader Sama doesn't want it around here. He said something about having enough enemies without that in our backyard. What's that mean? Itachi sighed. Is there anything you still need before you go? Well, I have a gift for Uncle Toby. I'm not sure but Hari was already gone. Uncle Pain. Uncle Toby. Hari ran in the window and over the mound of paperwork that Pain had begun to use as a desk in deference to the fact that his actual desk was still being used as a nest. Yes? The orange-haired man looked up, head cocked to the side. I'm headed out to school. Thank the gods, muttered Pain. But I wanted to give Uncle Toby a gift before I did. Toby took the package warily. It was shaped properly to be his mask. He tore the wrapping open and froze. In his hands was his mask. If it had been whittled from a rotted log by a 2-year-old. It bore a superficial resemblance to his mask, but the paint was haphazardly applied, and the underlying wood was pitted with age and damage. And the chisel had slipped regularly. See? I replaced the mask I borrowed. Hari waved and then vanished in a cloud of fire as his Uncle Toby began to vibrate with happiness. Roughly the same time . Haydn was standing guard outside the perimeter of the tower. As was usual when guarding something that no one is stupid enough to attack, and that most people would never think worth attacking in the first place, he was doing so by sitting in a lawn chair. There wasn't any sun, but he was making the best of it with a large umbrella and a warm blanket. He was, however, remaining alert. Sometimes he let out a snore to make sure people knew he was paying attention. Someone gently prodded his foot, and then jumped back to avoid the instinctive swing of a giant scythe that was his response. What do you lot want? He'd trailed off as he realized that the 4 standing in front of him were some of the weirdest he'd ever seen. One of them was fat and balding, one had a twin and a baby carrier on his back, one had 6 arms, and he'd fucked the redhead. We would like to speak to your leader, said the one with blue hair and a 3rd head. Orochimaru would like to request the return of his research. Research? Haydn blinked. What? Listen, you walking cocksleeve, snapped the redhead. Orochimaru sent us to get his stuff back from your freak child. Haydn blinked again. Says the thing made for Dick. I can give you a better use for that mouth, you arrogant little cunt. I'll make it twice as dirty. The fat one covered his face with his hands. Why did you take the tape off her? Oh, you're a kinky little bitch, Ainsha? I'm going to kill you, Jirobu. Then I'm going to kill this limp-dicked old man. I'll show you, old man slut. You'll be screaming for this old man cock. Or maybe just screaming. Haydn groped himself lewdly and gave a pelvic thrust. But I bet you like it that way, right? Not like you'd get it up to try, you walking example of a used condom. The one with 6 arms grabbed the redhead's limbs and slapped a hand over her mouth. Shut up, shut up, shut up. If you need to restrain her, I've got plenty of chains. In the meantime, keep her quiet. She shouldn't make noise and that mouth should be closed unless it's being put to its proper use. The freak screamed as her foot met his crotch, and he clutched at himself with all his hands. Trying to help some loser rape me because you're too weak to even try on your own? She snarled at him as he whimpered. She started to stomp on his hands, A ball buster too? I'll give you ball busting. The redhead began to grow dusky as she drew a flute from her sleeve. Tayuya! Snapped the three-headed one. The girl subsided into sotto voce curses and deprecations regarding the potency and virility of everyone around her. I'd be happy to show you differently, you mouthy panty hamster, Haydn drawled, groping himself and doing some more thrusts. Please don't encourage her, said the quiet one as the fat, balding one grabbed Tayuya and shushed her. Maybe we can discuss business? I've got business with her, ow. Haydn clutched at his head where Deidara had smacked him. What do you want, yeah? Asked the mad bomber. We've come to request Lord Orochimaru's research back. Deidara looked past the four to see a small army of ninja looking slightly nervous. Yeah? Well, I say request, the apparent leader shrugged. What research, yeah? He didn't say. I gather it was taken by someone very short who kidnapped one of our ninja while he was visiting. Lord Orochimaru is most upset. Was the kidnapped ninja Uchiha Sasuke, yeah? I'm not at liberty to answer that question, came the prim answer as the man gave a slight nod. I'll see if I can at least find out, yeah. Pain, yeah? Deidara poked his head into the room. Hey, Toby, yeah, he greeted the shaking figure. So, there are a bunch of sound ninja downstairs. They're requesting the return of some research material Hari took, yeah. When you say requesting, Pain murmured. There's a small army, yeah. I think they're planning to insist, yeah. I see. Well then Pain cut himself off as Toby stormed over to the window and leaned forward slightly, lifting the bottom of his mask. The tower began to shake suddenly as flashes of light threw the cheerful idiot's shadow on the far wall, outlined in flickering orange and red. Throughout it all, there was a long scream of anger. It was just possible to tell, between the explosions, that the scream was. After a time, the mask was replaced and Toby left the room, stomping and muttering unkind words about his nephew. Deidara walked over to the window and glanced outside. They appear to have left, Pain. The man in question covered his face in his hands. Thank you, Deidara. Anytime, yeah. Lord Orochimaru. Ah, Kimimaro, the snake sage purred as he turned from an experiment that entailed doing something unpleasant, for someone else, to a person's liver while it was still in active use. How did it go? About that, my lord. Did your team get my research back? Kimimaro watched as from out of the tower, balls of fire the size of trees began to rain down. I would say that the negotiations broke down. How did that happen? Then the explosion started. And then more fire enveloped the area in a hellish conflagration. Actually, I would say that the negotiators broke down. Come again? Someone decided to hit them with fireballs. Are they dead? I think so, Lord Orochimaru. You think they're dead? The reflective surface of the ground shattered into fine powder under the barrage before turning liquid again and forming a gleaming crust. There weren't any bodies, but I don't know if they could survive being turned to glass, then pulverized to dust and then reglassed. Oh. But I'm aware that these are people associated with you, Lord Orochimaru, so I can't be sure. I see. While I thank you for your faith in me, Kimimaro, I think that I can safely say that the team is deceased. Shame. I was most sorry to lose Sakan and Yukon, said Kimimaro. And Tayuya and Jirobo and Kidamaro, added Orochimaru. He was an especially successful work. Yes, them too, Lord Orochimaru. Might I ask, Kimimaro, why it is that you got there in a week and it took you two to return? Well, given how displeased someone was, I thought it best if I took a slightly more circuitous route to avoid bringing anyone with me. Lord Orochimaru, said Kabuto, entering the room. Oh, hello Kimimaro. Finally turned up? Yes, Yakushi. Nice of you to get here. Speaking of turning up, want to know who was knocking on the front gate just now? If you tell me that it's someone wearing red and black, I'm going to be really upset. No, Uchiha Sasuke walked into the room looking bored. I would have been pretty annoyed if my nephew'd shown up again. Ah, Sasuke. Orochimaru's voice made the other three cringe a little, wondering if he was about to molest Sasuke right there. So nice of you to come back. You didn't finish training me. True. Welcome all the same. We were just discussing the deaths of the Sound Four. That's a few less reasons to question my choice to return, at least. Back to the subject at hand. Do you have any clues why someone decided to escalate from military presence to utter annihilation of all parties? No, not really. Well. Kimimaro stroked his chin for a moment. There was a scream that sounded like ha-ha-ari, so maybe it was Hari but really stretched out? What the hell does my nephew have to do with those four wastes of flesh turning to corpses? Glass, Uchiha, interjected Kimimaro. What? They turned to glass and powder and glass. Not corpses. Will I have to hear the crazy redhead suggest that I lack the potency to impregnate an already knocked up bitch her words again? No. Will the fat one complain again? No. Will the idiot with the arms try to be funny? No. Will the freak with the freakish tumor try and order me around? No. Then I don't really care about the details. Your empathy is touching, Sasuke, said Kabuto with a faint smile that made Sasuke think the boy might be serious. Wait, what was that about your nephew? Said Orochimaru, suddenly looking up. What? You asked what your nephew had to do with the deaths of the Sound Four. Oh. Yeah. I don't know a lot of reasons for someone to shout the syllables Hari, but I can think of one, and it's a pretty good reason. You have a nephew? Yes. And a cousin. Your brother seems to have been a bit lax in his execution of your family. Oh, and a sister. Good grief. Definitely not as advertised. To be fair, deciding not to murder his own son and his sister who mothered him the son, isn't totally unreasonable. Come again? My family bred my older brother with our older sister. That's sick. Orochimaru's pale skin had turned slightly green. Did I mention he was 11 at the time? Your family were freaks whose deaths leave the world a better place. I know, right? And the worst part was that they pretended she was dead. I think they kept her locked up in the basement for my brother. It's probably why he went insane. Were they trying to isolate some aspect of the Sharingan? Orochimaru's head cocked as he considered the matter. That would make sense from a purely pragmatic standpoint. It's what we do with dogs. Thanks for that. What was your sister's name? Kiko, replied Sasuke. But she goes by Conan now for some reason. Are you okay? The last part was because Orochimaru had been caught between maniacal laughter and choking. Good gods. Orochimaru's voice was several octaves higher than usual. He cleared his throat. Itachi was forced to breed with his bastard half-sister? Bastard? This sister lives in Rain? Yeah. Orochimaru activated an illusion and pointed to the image's hair. Do you know any Uchiha with blue hair? Oh, fuck my life. What? Kimimaro seemed vaguely concerned about a fellow Sound Ninja. So, one of my parents cheated. And they forced the result of that affair to become a breeding factory for their kid. So, they must have been trying to fix some recessive trait that emerged thanks to their affair, Orochimaru murmured. He whirled to face Kabuto. Why did you never bring me the Uchiha breeding logs? As far as I know, because they don't exist, Lord Orochimaru. My brother might have burned them. He burned plenty of stuff on his way out, I'm told. Damnation. Foiled again by the Uchiha prodigy. Orochimaru kicked his test subject, who gurgled gratefully as the blow killed him. Damn again. Now I have to start over. Sasuke was starting to wonder about the wisdom of his choice. A hand clapped down on his shoulder. Sasuke, said Kabuto. We need to make sure you didn't get soft during your time away. Outtake. The fourth-year Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs walked into the defense classroom and warily eyed the blonde man. Maybe they weren't so sure about that with hair covering one side of his, again, that question, face, and a cloak like Hurry's robes. The Muggle-born in the class were warier, as many of them recognized the object being idly tossed from hand to hand as a grenade. Their pure-blooded comrades were surprised that they shoved their way to the back, setting aside house rivalries in their desperation to be far from the future epicenter. Good afternoon, class, said Hari. Today, we have a guest instructor again. This is my uncle Deidara. Hey there, yeah. My name is Deidara and I'm the Mad Bomber of Stone. He delivered the title with the same pride that someone else might say that he or she were the King of England. Today we will be studying various kinds of shields. Here the blonde looked down at a note in one hand. Magical and normal, and their various applications in preventing, avoiding, and channeling significant concentrations of force. In other words, we are playing with explosives today, yeah. So, said Hari, who can name a shield usable against a standard explosive hex? One of the Hufflepuffs raised a hand. An enemy? Hari smiled. Exactly. One of our focuses today will be on summoning charms. Deidara tapped Hari on the shoulder and pointed out the window. And as our guest instructor reminds me, we are adjourning to the out-of-doors in order to still have a castle at the end of lessons today. And I would like to thank our guest instructor for graciously donating his time to help our students learn the best way to avoid being turned into a bloody paste. It is most unfortunate that 3 students didn't learn in time, said Dumbledore after dinner. I am happy to say that we were planning to expand the lake, so the impromptu demolitions performed as part of today's unplanned activities work out for the best, although we are having to see if we can find a new colony of mere people to move in. Again. On a related note, I am happy to report that the Forbidden Forest is much less forbidden, in that there is less of it to forbid. On the other hand, I am able to announce the new rules regarding the Forbidden Crater, which students are expressly forbidden from entering until such time as it has been verified clear of all remaining explosives and landmines. I hope you all enjoyed your fish for dinner, and will do so again for the foreseeable future. He turned to Deidara. Please don't come back. Chapter 39, Angled Chaos. Severus Snape unzipped the fly of his semi-muggle pants, and began his summer ritual of relieving himself on the grave of his father. It wasn't nearly enough to repay the bastard for years of misery, but it was a final humiliation that Snape intended to enjoy until he died if it required catheter bags to achieve. The man wasn't actually buried there, because Snape had spent a good bit of time looking up rituals in the forbidden section of the library, and had made use of the absolute darkest one he could find that involved defiling the grave of one's father. To maximize the effect, he'd reburied the man and defiled the new grave several times. He only stopped when he ran out of goats. What are you doing, Professor Snape? Urine flew wildly as Snape jumped. Damn it, Potter. Hey, Professor. Snape closed his eyes and focused on finishing what he was doing before turning around to glare at the brat. Was that absolutely necessary? Whose grave is that? Hari noted the name Tobias Snape on it. Someone in the way of your inheritance? Snape stared for a moment. In a manner of speaking. Brother? No. Sister? With a name like Tobias? You people have weird names. No. Oh. How'd he die? Officially? Suicide. They didn't want to list severe rupturing on the death certificate. Hari nodded sagely. So, I need you to analyze something. And if I say no? Here, Harry replied, shoving a cup of water into the man's hands. Snape considered for a moment before deciding that saying no wasn't going to work and, in fact, that the effort to get Potter to fuck off during his sacred time away from students would be greater than just dealing with this. Knowing that he'd damned himself, he drew his wand and poked it at the water. It's water. No, it's not. Snape closed his eyes for a moment. Potter, it's water. I'll be right back. Snape watched his student, for a very loose definition of the term, vanish in a ball of fire. Shouldn't there have been a phoenix there? Maybe there was, and his brain was just refusing to accept it. 20 minutes later, he brought a lawn chair outside with a drink made from fire whiskey. Sort of. As the potions master of one of Europe's most prestigious schools, he had access to more than enough lab equipment and had, over the years, worked on redistilling fire whiskey into something far more potent. The rest of his drink was a carefully balanced cocktail of poisonous potions that counteracted each other in a surprisingly fruity aftertaste. Of course, if someone hadn't spent so much time building tolerances to toxins of all sorts, and even more time cutting open his abdomen and fusing a bezoar to his liver, it would probably be instantly lethal, and then do horrible things to the corpse. Harry landed in Diagon and began to stroll down the street, taking things in. There were an awful lot of those Auror people hanging around. The occasional Hogwarts student recognized Harry and turned to go in the opposite direction, but no one else realized that the boy who lived was also apparently in possession of only one eye, that the eye in question was red and spinning and walked around with several openly carried weapons. Harry looked at a daily prophet someone was reading. Oh. That explained a lot. And made things more confusing. London Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, spoke once again about the need for public calm in the wake of the escape of a maximum security prisoner from Azkaban 3 weeks ago. While our community is still reeling from the escape and the deaths of 6 Aurors in the process, for those readers who weren't aware, the last time more than 2 Aurors died in a single incident was not since he who must not be named was active. The minister reaffirmed the need to stand strong and work together to bring the monster to justice. The public is asked to remain alert and report any sightings of the ministry's public enemy number 1. If anyone sees him, please contact the Aurors as quickly as possible. Do not engage him in conversation, let alone anything more, says Director of Magical Law Enforcement, Amelia Bones. Again, do not approach this man. I cannot stress enough just how dangerous Gilderoy Lockhart is. We think that he might be wearing the disguise of Stubby Boardman, picture to the left, so be alert and stay safe. Harry was trying to process that as he skimmed the rest of the paper being read across the street. An unrelated article nevertheless caught his attention. Amelia Bones praised Hogwarts yesterday when she noted that the newest recruits for the Auror Academy seemed to be remarkably well prepared. She specifically praised the defense against the dark arts program at her alma mater, saying, "I was truly impressed with how ready to defend people these new recruits are. They show the willingness to deal with dangerous situations that normally takes years to develop. Whatever it is Albus Dumbledore is doing, he should keep it up." It would appear that despite Albus Percival Wulfric Brian James Franklin Aesop Cicero Dumbledore being the most unhinged man to wield political power in our fair country, he is somehow making strides in education. We only hope that he managed it without scarring our youth for life. So Gilderoy Lockhart was wanted. Harry made his way to Nocturne and decided to kill 2 villages with one technique. "Hi, Professor." Snape gagged on his drink and fire blasted from his nostrils as he coughed. "Potter." He looked up from his potions magazine to see Harry holding a somewhat terrified-looking old woman. "What are you doing with Miss Cripslock?" "Well, I needed to demonstrate that the water isn't just that. And you couldn't do it on yourself or me because it would be lethal." "How'd you know?" "It came to me." "Now put her back." "But..." "No, Potter, put her back. I buy things from her. I won't be able to do that if you kill her, so put her back." Harry vanished in a cloud of fire, leaving the shaking woman on Snape's lawn. He sighed and petrified her before going back to his magazine. He'd been planning to read it today, and maybe he could get most of that done before. Hari appeared again with a trunk. I've got her shop packed up for you. Even the stuff she had under the weird spells in the back. Not sure what they were for, though. That's all well and good, but I don't want to have to find a new supplier. Put her back. But now, find someone I won't miss to use as your crop. Hari grumbled something that Snape decided to pretend he didn't hear and vanished with the woman. Snape was about to go back to his magazine when he realized that the trunk was still on his lawn. He shrugged and levitated it over to him and began to go through it. Then he slammed it shut and looked around in sudden paranoia. If people ever knew he'd even had something resembling custody of some of these things, he'd be lucky to go to Azkaban. On the other hand, the odds of him ever getting to use these ingredients. He looked around again, and then sent a Patronus to Dumbledore. Moments later, Fawkes landed on the trunk and vanished. The Hogwarts Potions Master's lab was pretty hard to find already. He'd be upgrading that. Hi, Professor. Snape looked up from his contemplation of ways to secure the stash until he could see if there might be some beneficial use to some of the Class I potions ingredients. And maybe some uses that Class II ingredients could be used for that might justify their acquisition. Then he sighed. Borgin. How nice to see you. I have rights. Snapped the man. I know you, Snape. You're traitorous scum. You, he gurgled when Hari chopped him across the throat. You talk too much. Hari held up a glass. This is water. He poured it down the man's throat, ignoring the choking as some of it went the wrong way. This is hero water. This time, the liquid was swallowed and then followed by the manifestation of a visible magical aura. That. Snape cast a few spells. There is no way that old bastard had that much power. Hero water, replied Hari. Snape ignored the boy and instead began casting diagnostic spells on Borgin. Oh, that's not going to end well for him, he murmured. I don't know how it's doing it, but I think it's burning life energy for power. Could be. I'm going to take a guess, Snape went on as he conjured some parchment and pulled a ballpoint pen from a pocket. You want to know how to make more and how to make it not kill you to use it, right? Hari blinked. Yes. Sounds like I have a project for this year then. Snape paused. By the way, Professor Sprout says that whatever the hell it was you planted in her greenhouse has been wandering around at night, and would you please have a word with it? I guess. She's overjoyed, mind you, but it keeps picking fights with the Whomping Willow. She and Poppy are also wondering if you can find a way to get it to stop complaining when they cut samples off. I'll see what I can do. Hari vanished in a ball of fire. Hari sat with a handful of normal medical gear and a few vials of potions. It had taken some time and several kidnapped people before he'd worked out what the right dosage had been. Out of deference to Professor Snape, he'd made sure that they didn't have potion shops. Then he'd had to work out how to make sure he got full coverage, but he finally was pretty sure that he would manage now. Hari strolled out of Fortescue's shop. It had been his last stop and he'd gotten more than enough to do the trick. Now, he just had to sit back and watch. As Hari strolled towards the leaky cauldron, he heard the sound of someone gasping and then, moment later, the cry of "There he is!" And the sound of spellfire. Then the screams started and began to spread rapidly. The next day, Hari stole a Daily Prophet and read the article as he sat on the only remaining chair in the leaky cauldron. The smell of smoke reminded him of home as he absently ate some pocky he'd taken from his hosts while they had been asleep. London yesterday. A scene of absolute chaos engulfed Diagon Alley in what is already being referred to as the Lockhart Siege. Dozens of witches and wizards, many of them minors, found themselves forcibly transformed into facsimiles of Gilderoy Lockhart while going about their normal shopping. Aurors, who were on guard for the presence of public enemy number 1, proceeded to do their duty and attempted to bring in the most wanted man in all of England. The resulting violence only spread as person after person transformed, sometimes en masse, and Aurors valiantly tried to capture all of their quarries at once. Unfortunately, several of the later victims of this transfiguration took poorly to what some have called the high-handed and brutal tactics employed by the Aurors as things grew more and more out of hand and attempted to fight back. As a result, Aurors began to use the spells they normally reserve for violent altercations, and the new recruits stationed with their training wizards escalated to banishing transfigured steel projectiles and massed clouds of flechette or grapeshot that they insisted they learned at Hogwarts. Despite the overenthusiasm of the trainees, St. Mungo's reports that all are expected to survive, including several bystanders who were pinned between a Lockhart lookalike and a wall by a steel spike, and those who suffered injuries or loss of limbs to the trainees' crowd control methods used to disperse groups of Lockharts with unfortunate results. Several trainees were heard bemoaning that their professor would be so disappointed in them. It should come as no surprise that Gilderoy Lockhart would be sad to hear that his ploy to kill nearly 100 innocents in Diagon Alley failed, and that despite his attempts to train young witches and wizards to be his butchers by proxy, that he would be most upset that they didn't kill anyone. The Ministry insists that Lockhart I, later identified as Lucius Malfoy, flung the first spell, and so would not be paying damages for any of the resulting battle. Upon discovering who Lockhart I was, Minister Fudge attempted to backtrack and said that some reparations might be paid, but was cut off by the Ministry treasurer, who held firm to the promise made. Time will tell whether anyone will receive money for their losses in this horrible tragedy. Any person with information that can assist the authorities in their pursuit of the monster Lockhart who perpetrated this travesty is encouraged to contact Amelia Bones, Director of Magical Law Enforcement, who has insisted that Lockhart will stand trial for his recent crimes before execution if I really must allow it. Outtake. Good afternoon, class, said Harry as he sat on the desk at the front of the room. Next to him was a white-haired man with impressive musculature on display. The man also was missing his arms, although missing was probably too strong, given that a pair of arms with his skin tone were lying against the wall behind the desk. For some reason, Harry was holding the end of a length of chain that led to a collar around the man's neck. The man was scowling as best he could with a ball gag in his mouth. The 7th year sighed and prepared for another practical lesson. Now that everyone is here, we will be going outside to the expanded lake. Today is target practice against living target. Don't you mean targets, Professor Harry? No. Oh. Your target today is acting as a stand-in for the various dangerous creatures you may face in your careers as wielders of weapons of casual destruction. As Harry spoke, he dragged Haydn from the room. When we get outside, you will form up and, one at a time, take turns facing off against our guest professor, Haydn. He will charge you and attempt to bite your throat out or kick your testicles/ovaries through your pelvis. I will give you this fair warning that if you do not use the tactics I have been instructing, you will be lucky if you just spend the evening in hospital. And so we once again thank a guest lecturer for visiting our lovely school in order to broaden our horizons. I thank Professor Potter for restoring the gag to the current guest, so that we do not risk our hair catching fire under a stream of invectives. I am sure we all wish a quick recovery to those of the 7th year class who were too stupid to heed a direct warning from their professor. Thankfully, Madame Pomfrey was on hand during class, and was able to prevent any loss of life, though I understand that Miss Hale will never get the use of her arm back, and that Messrs. Puce and Tier will not be able to continue their family lines, so at least something good has come out of this. Dumbledore turned to the man who was still missing his arms, and was wrapped in chains and bound to a chair by the expedient method of transfiguring part of the chair into straps. I say this with feeling, never come back. Chapter 40, It all started with an article. Or the magazine that changed the world. Harry was going through the magazines at various newsstands and noticed one that he'd overlooked in the past. He absently stole it and began to read, casually sidestepping traffic as he ignored lights and signals and, on one occasion, a high-speed lorry. Without paying attention, he walked down an alley and lost the pursuit of several officers, who wanted to discuss various accidents that had happened as a result of people swerving to avoid him. It didn't help that they didn't look up where Hari had simply walked up a wall, still reading. Technically, he'd read the thing instantly with his Byakugan, but he wanted to memorize it, and then actually consider whether this was a prank. When he finally decided it wasn't, he picked someone's pocket for a bit of money to buy postage, and began to scrawl a long note. Itachi looked at the letter that had been dropped on his bed by his sons. At some point he would ask what it was. He knew Leader Sama called it an ember chicken and various other rude things, but he had kept forgetting to have a word with his son about the actual species. He missed his son, come to think of it, but he had to admit there was a great deal more peace without him, even with Haiden around and Madara apparently going sane. He shrugged, opened the envelope, and read it. Then he read it a few more times, and a small smile grew on his face. He tucked it into a pocket, and went to go tell Leader Sama the news. And so several of my spies have disappeared. Sasori reported. It is most mysterious. Only 2 people knew those were my agents, and I find it hard to believe that so many of my people might have sudden, lethal intentionals coincidentally. Itachi poked his head in. Is now a bad time, Leader Sama? Pain sighed. Not really, Itachi. Seated at the table with him were Sasori, who was actually hunched beside the table, and Toby, who was having one of his increasingly frequent moments of semi-sanity, and was perched on the back of a chair, but had, as best as could be seen with only one eye visible, a dark look on his face. Someone is attacking our informants, then, hissed Toby. Sasori seemed nonplussed by the inclusion of someone who was not technically an inducted member of the group, but was going along with it. And if your reports are to be believed, also several of Rain's trade partners on whom we depend for supplies. That sums it up pretty well, yes, said Sasori. Though you forgot that a bounty that Kakuzu was looking to collect was collected early. That might not be related, but it was not a low-risk bounty, and none of the usual players were around. There are some facts in your report, murmured Toby. I wish to think on them for a time when we finish. I wonder. Sasori shrugged. What do you want, Itachi? Itachi held out the note to Pain, who skimmed it, and handed it to Sasori, who passed it to Toby, who suddenly seemed to brighten up and almost fell off the back of his chair as he began to cackle with amusement. Dear Dad. You'll never believe what I found. I don't know how I missed this in the past, but there is the most awesome magazine ever. It's a sort of public advertisement selection of people looking to be hired to fight in various conflicts, but this is sold in public. Not public like posted somewhere, but circulated all over the world. I figure I have a bit of time before school starts, so I've decided to begin a franchise here, and am actively seeking employment in a small war which I promise I will end in a satisfactorily violent and immediate fashion. Best from your son. Hari, Akatsuki Branch Office Proprietor. Dear gods, murmured Pain. I wonder how he got the idea that I approved of this. He ignored Toby's cough in deference to the presence of Sasori. But I suppose that at least he can't damage our reputation here. Worst comes to worst, he burns the world down around him and comes home. On second thought, that really is the worst possible outcome. Toby looked at Itachi. You're not worried he'll get hurt? Itachi raised an eyebrow. Toby snickered. We trained him. Right. Hari held up the magazine and read his ad with pride. Call the Dawn. No conflict too big, no assassination target too small. We don't ask questions like why, just when, where, who, and how. If you absolutely need it dead, we're the ones to call. All problems solved in 1 month or less, plus travel time, guaranteed, or your money back. Only accepting contracts until the middle of August so proprietor can return to school. Dial 555-555 kill, ask for Director Hari of the Dawn Branch Office. Also ask about employment opportunities. It had appeared right above an ad that seemed familiar somehow. Are you in trouble? Do you need help and everyone else has turned you down? Maybe you can hire us. Only accepting contracts in person, we always get the job done in the end, and even leave your enemies alive to gloat over. We provide all equipment. No contracts from the American military accepted. Visit Lee's Lucky Laundry, Back Alley, Los Angeles, ask for Mr. Lee. Hari had set up an office in the back room of the restaurant he was staying in again. So far, no one had called, but that was to be expected. In the meantime, the family was happy that their guest was doing something productive and promised to take any messages that came for him and mail them to the dead drop he'd arranged. Hari strolled into Diagon Alley and smiled. There were several charred ruins of shops and almost every storefront was battered by projectiles. The Aurors on guard were exceptionally jumpy and probably worried about what would happen if any more disasters struck, and they responded as they had been trained. The people who were abroad in the alley had the nervous look of chickens being guarded by the foxes and aware that the wolf was outside and scratching at the gate. They watched the Aurors warily, as though expecting that at any moment, one of the defenders of law would whip out his or her wand and begin flinging indiscriminate violence about the general vicinity. Hari was tempted to stop inside Gringotts to see if there was any damage inside, but the goblins had a distinctly unfriendly look, and he didn't plan to head inside there until he was ready to test their security. Judging from the scorches on the facade, though, the bank had not been immune to the recent events. In fact, the only shop not marked was the one with Ollivander's sign up over it. No one seemed surprised by this. Now seemed as good a time as any to get to work on something that he really should have been addressing for the past couple of years. Hari wandered the alley, looking for an Auror with a fancier badge. Having selected one, he walked up to the man and waved. When the man waved back, Hari's Sharingan spun more wildly for a moment, and then he turned and began to walk away. That got a bit of work out of the way. He made his way into Nocturne and decided to go through Borgen's shop to see if anything interesting was in there before anyone realized that the man was absent. 10 minutes later, he emerged, whistling absently. He wished he had some polyjuice left, but figured those things would get dull if he reused a trick too often. On the other hand, he had sealed a cabinet in his forearm to examine later. It was clearly a transporting device, but he had no idea of how or where to. That would bear investigating. And the use of test subjects. He left via the leaky cauldron, which was now mostly a shell and staffed by a pair of incredibly unhappy-looking Aurors with grim expressions and the looks of people who weren't sure if they had drawn shit duty, or the lucky spot out of immediate line of fire. His stop in Borgen's reminded him that he needed to do a bit of shopping before he had to return to school. He decided to visit the British Museum again, and amused himself for almost an hour by avoiding their improved security, and then accessing the secret vault so that he could collect a few more items. He felt it would be best to be polite, so he left a single, white glove in place of the dark marble with a couple specks of plaster dust on it and the small, blue gemstone that smelled faintly of goose. That dealt with several of his needs, but he also stopped off at a pet shop and then swung by the SAS lifeguard store. He had to avoid some rather obstinate guards and an increased number of defenses. That was life. He wanted to refill his supplies before he got called to work. It was depressing that the calls weren't in already, but that was to be expected. Hari leaned back in the chair he occupied, the only person in the abandoned ice cream parlor in Diagon. While people were slowly trickling back into the alley in general, no one had returned to Fortescue's shop. Apparently, people were upset about the number of children who had been maimed in and around it as a result of being dosed with polyjuice through their skin. It meant that Hari had a comfortable seat to himself and comparative peace and quiet as he watched people go by. He was sitting with an ever-filled notebook and a stack of folders, and was busily copying bits of information even as his Sharingan memorized everything. One of the things about the Sharingan was that despite having perfect recall, being able to recall everything in one memory, and having that memory be organized and including analysis made things easier. It was fascinating stuff he had in front of him, and was beginning to make some guesses about things that he didn't know for sure. He'd probably send his compiled books to Uncle Sasori to have him check them over, but he was already getting a pretty good picture of how things were working, and not working, beyond his first-hand observations. On his other side was a thick book that had the dull appearance of an accounting ledger, and he made frequent reference to it, even if that wasn't possible to notice from how he never actually looked at the text in question. He had a small notebook in which he was compiling figures and mumbling to himself as he did. Out of the corner of his eye, the Sharingan one. The other didn't see things in its corners. He saw a large dog sniffing around a gutter. That was odd. No one was paying it any mind, but most people probably thought that the collar around its neck meant that it was owned, and that its owner was somewhere nearby. He watched for a time, setting his work aside and considering. He had some unique insights available to him at the moment as well, so perhaps others could be forgiven for missing the obvious. Maybe. Regardless, he packed up his things. He figured there was a good chance he might want to make a few purchases before it slipped his mind. It would be fun eventually. He trotted through Diagon, made a turn down Nocturne, and towards the darker part of Sekshu. There was a good chance he'd find what he was looking for there. If not, he'd try Rect or Nature. Outtake. Good afternoon, class, said Hari. He pointed at the giant man standing beside him. The man, in turn, glowered at the assembled first years with eyes like cold emeralds in seas of ink. Today, I brought in a guest to help begin your training in properly aggressive defensive tactics. My name is Kakuzu. The man's voice was almost metallic, and had a grinding quality like meshing gears. You will call me teacher. The students nodded in terrified obedience. Good. I don't like children. I don't like teaching. I like money. My nephew isn't paying me, so I am in a bad mood. He cracked his neck, a process that took far too long and made too many sounds. Everyone up. We're going to be having a practical lesson. The man tossed his cloak to the side, and the students gasped as they saw a body crisscrossed with horrific scars and covered in obscene stitching. Today you learn by sparring against me. I wish to thank our guest instructor, Mr. Kakuzu, began Dumbledore as he looked out at the great hall. I know that all of us are stronger for his teaching. Many of us will even get feeling back in our extremities in due time. He looked around. Of course, it's a shame that so many of our young students are currently in hospital instead of enjoying dinner with us, but since none of them have a working set of teeth at the moment, it is to be expected. It's for the best, really. They'd be sad watching us eat this lovely food and having their nutritious gruel. I note that only 2 students are having bones other than teeth regrown at the moment, which is, I feel, a sign of the improvements made by those of you who have regularly attended your defense classes. I am pleased to announce that 1 student other than Professor Potter managed to go a whole 6 seconds with our guest before having his skull cracked in 6 places and every bone in his body snapped like a twig. Dumbledore looked at the massive figure that was poking its food despondently. Please don't come back. Chapter 41, The Party Was a Killer. Hermione wasn't even slightly surprised when there was a whooshing sound behind her as she changed into her swimsuit. Hari. I know how hard it is to hurt you, but I swear to all that is holy that if you do not leave this room right now, I will find a way. Out. Oh. Hermione heard the sound of the door open, and then the beginning of a tirade from her father as the door shut again. She finished changing, and then stepped out to find her friend sitting on a beach chair, ignoring her father's attempts to make clear that peeping on his daughter was not okay. She covered her face with her hands. Her father was not only shouting, but trying to strangle her friend, who was having a conversation with her mother while holding her father's hands away from his neck, apparently unaware of the fact. Hey, Hermione. How's your summer? Hari raised his voice slightly to be heard over her father, who was now trying to get his hands free for what Hermione assumed was some other murder-related reason. Not bad. She was trying to pretend that people weren't looking at them from around the beach house they'd rented for the month. People on the beach were staring because of the vitriol and threats being issued from an adult male towards a 13-year-old boy. Though I hope we won't be spending time waiting for my father to get booked. You want him to stop? Hari's foot suddenly swung up and impacted the man's jaw, silencing him as his eyes rolled back in his head, and he dropped to the wooden deck. There. He looked at her father. Why would he be booked? Threatening to hurt a minor. Hermione sighed as her mother went to check her husband's vitals. Who? You. Those were threats? Hari cocked his head. Does it count if it can't be done? Yes, it does. Huh. There's a thing. Other than that, things are going well? Hermione sat down in the chair vacated by her mother. Well enough. I think I'm becoming used to you. When you say well enough, you mean that your homework is done. Well, I wanted to make sure I had time. Of course. Have you been practicing? That's what I've been forgetting. Hey, Mom. I can finally show you magic. As Hari vanished, he heard someone shout, "Holy shit, she just levitated that guy." Hi, Pansy. Gah. Pansy whirled to see her friend. After 2 years, she was accepting that she had friends, but sometimes it was still a little odd for her to think about, standing beside her with a motorcycle. I thought I'd go riding with you. That's nice, but Pansy stopped talking as her clothes were transfigured into jeans and a t-shirt, the shawl she'd been wearing becoming a leather jacket. The sapphire slippers on her feet were turned into steel-capped boots, with flowers made of sapphires on the buckles. There you go. There was a pop and her bike was next to her. Now you can ride. Hari. She snapped. Yes? I'm going to a party. In that? After 2 years of exposure to Hari, even if it had been heavily indirect, Pansy didn't let out the primal scream that she felt welling up. Change my clothes back. Not until you ride with me. I need to go to that party. My parents are expecting me. So. We'll ride there. It's 100 miles from here. And? I'm supposed to be there in 3 minutes. We'll ride fast. You'll be fashionably late. No. I'm not changing your clothes back until you do. I'll go have my parents do it. They just left through the flow. How do you know that? Trade secret. Pipery. A house elf appeared next to her. Where are my parents? The mistress and master just left for the party. Young miss will be late now, and has ruined her good clothes, added the elf disapprovingly. I hate you, she said to Hari. Do I have a choice? Not if you want your clothes back. Mistress will be most upset, added the elf. Those was special clothes for the party. Fine. Pansy swung herself onto her bike. I know I've been practicing, but do you know how to? She trailed off as Hari popped a wheelie and roared down the grass towards the gates of the property. She sighed at the damage to the lawn and opened the throttle on her own bike, tearing after him into dusk. Hari. She shouted after him, you might want to know where the party is. Considering the lack of a direct route to their destination, Pansy was aware that they had made incredible time. Her parents had gone ahead to mingle with their hostess before the party proper began, and somehow Hari was riding up a formerly immaculate lawn only about an hour after Pansy should have been there, since she had already missed the pre-party mingling. She pulled up alongside him at the foot of the steps up to the manor house main entrance. How did you manage to avoid traffic? I don't think we had to drop below 120 the entire ride. Trade secret. Pansy dismounted. Now, how do I get my bike home? There was a pop. Never mind. Her glance swept down her Muggle ensemble. It was comfortable and practical, but still. Hari. I want my dress back. Hari shrugged. Sure. Pansy looked herself over again as best she could. She was once again wearing a white dress with blue snakes embroidered climbing up the sides. Thankfully, he'd restored her shawl and gloves. A quick check revealed that her slippers had returned as well. And my hair. It was incredibly odd to feel her hair just suddenly revert to the complex mess of black locks and hairpins without moving to be styled. Have fun, Pansy. Hari shredded more defenseless grass as he blew past the gates and out into the night. It was about then that Pansy realized the change in support. Did he? She slipped behind a hedge and glanced down. He did. She stomped back around the hedge and up the steps, brushing by the man who'd been standing ready to announce the latecomers. Daphne looked up to see Pansy storming over with a look on her face that said Hari was involved. It was familiar. What kept you? She asked. Pansy stared at her with enough venom that for a moment, Daphne feared that her sort of friend was going to try and kill her. Finally, she spoke. Hari took my dress and wouldn't give it back until I rode here on my motorcycle. There was a snicker from an older teen who was nearby. Not like that. He transfigured it into Muggle riding clothes. Daphne closed her eyes for a moment. And you rode with him? Yes. Together? Yes. That's interesting. Pansy looked at her sort of leader for a long minute and then looked down at her chest and, for some reason, blushed, turning her nearly paper-white skin rosy. Then she walked calmly to one of the floating drink trays and took a goblet of fire whiskey. Daphne watched the girl gulp it in a single swallow and let the fire curl out of her mouth. You okay, Pansy? Pansy's eyes were closed and she seemed to be enjoying the fire still licking from her lips. Assuming my parents don't get wind of this. So no. Anything I can do? Pansy sighed. Not really. Hey, Hari. Tracy didn't even look up from her dinner when she heard a whooshing noise. She didn't jump when the report from her mother's new firearm echoed in the small room and a hole appeared in the wall behind her. Nice of you to drop in. Hari had watched the bullet miss him with interest, having dodged well in advance. Enjoying your new weapon? He inquired of Claire. The redhead was grinning hugely. Hey there. I've been hoping you'd drop by. No more guns. Insisted her husband. Not for that. I wanted to ask you a question, Hari. Yeah? Did you do this? She held up the month's edition of Soldier of Fortune. It doesn't say your surname, but I had a feeling that it might be you. Hari looked innocent. Why would you say that? Just a feeling, really. Well, in that case, no. That means yes, Mom, explained Tracy. I did work that out for myself, dear. Claire turned to Hari. Got any business yet? Hari shook his head. Nope. But I figure someone will need the job done right. It's cool that I'm able to talk to someone actually advertising in Soldier of Fortune. I wonder. Claire stared off into space for a moment. Han. Do you think that Lazo might know someone who needs work done? Her husband looked up when he realized she'd been speaking to him. Is he the one with the trench coat, the piles of ammunition, and makes house calls in a BMW? Yep. What kind of work? Wet. What? Oh. He seems like the type. He considered. Why? I thought I'd pass along Hari's name. That's nice. Wait. Tracy, meanwhile, had been chatting with Hari about who he had visited so far and was smothering her laughter at Hermione's fate and what had happened to Pansy. You knocked him out right there on the beach. Well, yeah. Did she try to kill you? Nah. She wanted to show her parents magic. On a Muggle beach? I guess. Oh. Tracy tried not to think about that for a moment. You transfigured Pansy's clothes? Dresses aren't good for riding a motorcycle. Did you revert everything? Of course. Wait, you made her ride all the way to the party? The one being hosted by the Quince matriarch? Yeah. Why? Hey, Dad? Yes? The Quinces. Are they part of your old crowd? Yeah. Stay away from them, Tracy. Tracy looked back at Hari. Oh gods. I should go have some dinner. I still want to visit Daphne. Hari vanished in a cloud of fire. Tracy looked at her mother and father. I really hope my friends don't die tonight. Daphne didn't realize that someone was behind her until she saw Pansy's skull. The pale girl had almost managed to relax a bit after the glass of alcohol had worked its way into her system. Now she had a dark look again. How long have you been there, Hari? About 5 minutes. Why? Just wondering how much time I have before. Harry. A blonde missile was shoving its way through the crowd, wearing a dark green dress and a red and orange mask with one visible eye. She launched herself at Hari, who stepped to the side. Astoria slammed into Daphne, who collided with Pansy, who had just grabbed another glass of fire whiskey. The drink went flying. It didn't fly long, landing on a trio of women and bursting into a brief flame that set them screaming and running through the party as though on fire. While his friends picked themselves up, Hari observed a large woman wearing a purplish dress that made her look rather like a blimp with a gray beehive on top. Her already expansive form swelled as she drew in breath. Who are you? Her accent was thickly upper crust. How did you get in here? Hari. I came with Pansy. No. You didn't. Pansy paused. Lady Quince, may I introduce you to Harry Potter, the one who saved us from the Dark Lord? The woman looked somewhat conflicted. Then she glanced around and noticed that there wasn't a single person who hadn't been acquitted of acting under the Imperius. You mean how I helped all those weak-willed losers who let themselves be controlled and then begged like bitches for mercy? Pansy twitched while Daphne covered her face with her hands. Out. The woman gestured imperiously towards the door. Eventually. Do you have anything good to eat? He turned and trotted over to the buffet, where he started to pick up various foodstuffs, and then tossed them over his shoulder with vague dismissals of quality. The hostess looked around again. No one here would miss the boy who lived. She hissed the incantation to a dark cutting curse and stared at the ruin of her table as Hari stepped slightly to the side to examine the punch. Hari whirled, pointing a breadstick and screamed finite. As he did, he manipulated a bit of magic. The Lady Quince turned into a facsimile of Lockhart. It's Lockhart. Everyone run. There were several minutes of panic that Hari spent sitting in a comfortable chair and watching the chaos while Pansy and Daphne stood next to him, trying to grasp how he had done so much damage. Eventually, calm was restored when everyone noticed that Lockhart had been stunned and someone pointed out that this was probably another prank. The general consensus became that someone had pranked Lady Quince by transfiguring her into Lockhart and that the Potter brat had cancelled the glamour cast over her. It was further decided that instead of ending the party early to try and sort it out, that it could be dealt with later. Hari watched from the armchair. Girl Toby? There was a sudden presence beside him. I need you to do something for me. Okay. Daphne and Pansy had made their way back to the buffet and returned with suspicious looks. What is my sister up to? Asked Daphne. I'm sorry. I just saw her sneaking out of the party just now. She's probably looking for the bathroom. Probably, yes. However, I doubt it. I asked her to check if there was anything valuable to break as revenge. Daphne sighed. Hey, Hari. I broke 2 expensive-looking vases to get back at her. And then I hid the pieces so she can't repair them. thank you, girl Toby. How's your summer been, Daphne? Hari asked as she sat down on a divan. Until you showed up? Quiet. I'm better at silencing charms than Astoria is at removing them. Unlike mine, which has been filled with complaints about me going muggle, grumbled Pansy. My parents are not pleased with the motorcycle. There was a bang as the door was kicked in. Horrors. Nobody move. Hari's eyes spun wildly. Magic gathered, and then from out of a cluster of guests, frozen in place by shock, a beam of light shot out and tore into an Auror's chest, leaving the cavity there more literal than before. A voice shouted, "Death to the Aurors! Long live the Dark Lord!" The Aurors responded with a volley of stunning spells. Except for the 5 trainees, who conjured jagged blades and banished them in whirling clouds into the cluster from which the spell had come. A moment later, one of the other guests drew his wand and screamed, "Kill the Aurors, my fellow Death Eaters! Before they can report back! For the Dark Lord!" And fired the killing curse. After that, things got a bit confused. "Come on." Hari pointed at a wall, which exploded. He grabbed Daphne and Pansy's hands and dragged them towards the opening. Pansy? Yeah. Old homes like these usually have some kind of reinforcement charms, right? Uh-huh. So that wasn't normal. Yes. Just checking. Hari had insisted that the girls stay in place even after the screams and explosions died down. He offered to check on things and poked his head out of the opening he'd made, dodging several lethal attacks and 2 stunners. Professor Potter. The lethal attack stopped instantly, though it took a moment or 2 longer before the stunners ceased. Hello, Rosier. How's life in the Aurors treating you? Pretty well, Professor. It's much nicer that I get to use my skills and have people happy with me. Mum and Dad aren't thrilled, but it's a respectable career. You're Professor Potter? Asked the Auror with a captain badge. For a month or so, yes. Please note, said the man as he held his arms out to the sides, that my hands are nowhere near my wand. Please note that my officers also are not reaching for their wands. I'm talking to you, Smythe. Not to worry, I'd know if you were going to try to kill me. Right. Well, as you can see, we're taking in the live ones for questioning, and the dead will be seen to. The injured too. Uh-huh. Hari walked over to a moaning form. Who did this one? Me, Professor Potter. What did I tell you about maiming Hayes? His arm is still half on. I'm sorry, Professor. He was behind 2 people. I got both of them. You come over here and finish what you started. Yes, sir. Began the Auror captain. You do know that prisoners aren't to be injured, right? They aren't? Asked Hari as the trainee came over. No, Professor, said Hayes. Stop resisting. He screamed at the comatose figure, then fired a cutting hex that severed the arm. We don't hurt prisoners, he explained as he cauterized the wound. If you say so. If you don't mind, I'd like to finish my job, said the captain. Not to worry. Can I take some young people home? How young? Asked the captain, looking at a 16-year-old with a glassy expression and several bits of shrapnel in her chest. 13? Sure. We're taking everyone else in. He gestured to several adults who weren't injured but had slightly shell-shocked expressions. Lord and Lady Greengrass, for example. I'll tell their daughters not to worry. X. Good news, bad news. Hari said. Oh? So, your parents are going to be questioned, but you are free to go, Hari replied. I'm not so sure about yours, Pansy. I think they're going to hospital for injuries first. Oh. So, I'll see you guys tomorrow. House elves wearing towels with the Hogwarts crest appeared and grabbed onto the girls, vanishing in a series of pops. Outtake. Harry was sitting on the desk at the front of the classroom with a half-dozen men all sporting orange hair and gratuitous body jewelry. The group also had eyes that were about as odd as the one of Harry's that was regularly visible. "Hello, class," Harry began. "Hey, Harry," said Tracy, without a hint of deference. "Who's this?" "This is my uncle, Payne." "Your uncle is named Payne?" asked Daphne. "No. This is Payne. That's one of them." "Who are the rest of them?" "This is my Uncle Payne," replied Harry. "And the others?" "This is my Uncle Payne." Harry pointed at another one. "This is my Uncle Payne. Payne." And again. "This is my Uncle Payne." Again. "This is my Uncle Payne." He pointed at a fifth. "This is my Uncle Payne." The last one. "This is my Uncle Payne." "They're all your Uncle Payne?" "Yep." "Not possible," snapped Hermione. "No one has successfully cloned anyone yet." A duplicate of Harry formed in a puff of smoke. "There. That's done. Moving on. My uncle will be helping us by allowing us to do live exercises teaching how to deal with multiple enemies who are making optimal decisions." Payne's fist slammed into Millicent's face. She staggered back a pace, but no further. "That's odd," commented Payne, who Harry knew to be the primary Payne. "I didn't pull my punch that much." Millicent's fist struck Payne, turning his head to the side. Ow. Mill was looking down at her hand. "Stupid spikes. Am I bleeding?" Heavenly gaze of the omnipresent God. The large girl flew across the room and smashed into the wall, sending up a cloud of stone shards and debris. "Yes." She climbed out of the hole, wiping blood from her lip. "You hurt me." Payne just stared at her. "No one but my mom's hurt me since I was 4. Harry blinked. Then he walked over to her and punched her in the nose. "Ow. Fuck." Millie clutched her nose as blood ran down her face. She glared at Harry. "Why? I didn't want to be left out." He caught her fist absently and kicked her away. "Away. I hate it when you do that." She dragged herself out of the pile of splinters that had been a desk and walked up to Payne, holding out her hand. "Good fight." Payne's gaze measured her for a moment. Then he took her hand. When she flipped him over her shoulder with a triumphant ha, she quickly followed it with what the one he held onto her hand as he continued the motion to land on his feet and fling her into the hole he'd already made. "Good fight. I would like to thank our guest lecturer today. With the exception of the class involving the second-year Slytherins, my castle seems to have sustained a remarkably small amount of structural damage, and no one appears to have acquired any new nightmare fodder. Compared to our recent guests, I find your restraint positively thrilling." Dumbledore paused and leaned down to listen to McGonagall. "I am told that, in fact, the 6th-year Newt class was doing their exercises in the Forbidden Crater and that, as a result, the crater is now much larger, and I now have reason to believe that some of the mines therein have been scattered onto previously safe parts of my lawn. Given that I can now no longer be certain that unforbidden areas of the school grounds are safe, I must revise my earlier assessment. You are possibly the worst so far. Please never return." Chapter 42, 6 times 9. Or check-ins, jail, and ice cream topping. "Hey, Daphne." The girl didn't move from her bed. From somewhere, she had acquired an eye mask and was using it to keep out the morning sunlight. "What do you want, Harry?" "I was checking to see how you're doing." There was a pause. "Are you feeling all right?" "I think that's my line," replied Harry. "It's too early for this." "I'm fine." My parents woke us up when they got home at 3 in the morning, so I'm trying to get back to sleep. Good, good. Hari? There was silence. Daphne smiled slightly and went back to sleep. Hello, Hari. Hi, Pansy. Pansy was sitting in her room, wearing nightclothes and apparently waiting for him, to judge from her expression. My father lost an arm last night. I saw. I should probably be mad at you. Why? It was your fault. Pansy growled. I don't think I made him fling some kind of purple fire thing at the Aurors. That was why, they replied. Pansy blanched slightly. Then she sighed and covered her eyes with her hand. I wish I were completely surprised. There was a strange look on her face as her eyes teared up a little. I should be upset. I really should. But all I could think last night was how it was the first piece I'd had since I got home. Hari shrugged and sat on her bed as the tears began to fall, watching her sit in the chair in front of her vanity. Your mother is home now, I see. Yeah. She got home after sunup and was already ranting about the evil Aurors who maimed my dad. And wrecked his wand. Oh. I don't think they realize that yet. Rosier did good work there. Pansy sniffled for a moment and then blinked. Wait. What? One of my 7th-year students. So, it is your fault. I stand by my previous position. He ignored the jar of makeup that missed him completely. He hadn't moved. Your aim needs work. And now I just wonder if it will be more or less peaceful after my father returns from St. Mungo's. I think the Aurors might want a word with him first. We're pretty rich. It's not an issue. Of course. I should send Rosier a letter and remind him to be vigilant for corrupted comrades. See you, Pansy. He vanished in a cloud of fire. Pansy sighed. He's getting better. Ish. She closed her eyes. I wonder if I can go back to school early this year. Hari handed the letter to the ministry he'd ambushed. It had taken a bit of work to convince it to take the letter anyway, but eventually his refusal to return its missive had done the trick. Hari strolled towards the Quince Manor and looked around. She had annoyed him, and he wanted to be sure he remembered where to tell them to look. He had no idea what she had in those buried caches, but people rarely kept things in places like that if they didn't mind everyone seeing them. He considered waylaying another owl, but decided to do things the other way. Besides, he wanted to see how the guards had improved. Hari trotted away from Buckingham Palace lighter by 1 letter. It would be worth it to see if the Aurors acted on his information. In the meantime, he'd added some notes on how to improve security to give him a challenge. Maybe next time he'd have some fun. Hey, Blaze. Hello, Hari. Blaze looked up from the Daily Prophet and considered the boy in front of him. You've had a busy summer. Nah. Boring, really. Though I got chewed out by my uncle. And making trouble in Diagon Alley? What happened there? Uh-huh. And you also caused a massive fight with Aurors in the home of a significant and powerful pureblood family. I'm a bit lost, Blaze. What are you talking about this time? Last night, someone turned Lady Quince into a copy of Gilderoy Lockhart. Someone anonymously tipped the Aurors about Lockhart's presence, and when they showed up, someone attacked them and Gregory Goyle Sr. declared for the Dark Lord, and then things got out of hand. Shocking. Indeed. I'm just glad you didn't get the girls killed. Who? Daphne and her sister were at the party along with Pansy. They could have been hurt. Oh. That would have been bad. Thank you for that, Hari. Where's your mom? Why? Blaze had a dark look on his face. Because I'd normally see her by now, and she's not in your house. Well. She's at her fiancé's bedside, trying to get the marriage sorted out before he dies of his wounds sustained at a party last night. Natural causes, you know. He did try to kill an Auror. Yeah. I think she just needs him to sign. Who is it anyway? I think it was Pharaoh O'Bansinson. What's he looks like? Pasty, kind thin. Very old. Graying hair, and I think he has cataracts, given that his eyes are cloudy. She might have trouble with that. Why? Jugson severed his arms. Oh. Well, I'm sure she'll find a way. Forgery is always a good option. That's what my Uncle Sasori always says. Nah. Magical ways of identifying it. Maybe she'll have him put the quill in his mouth. I think I remember him having some brain damage too. How do you know? Know what? What kind of damage he sustained? Magic. Blaze opened his mouth. Then he closed it again. That's a lousy answer. Magic. Yeah. I need to go visit Millie still. Wow. Blaze whirled to see his mother in the doorway. You're already bringing boys over while I'm out. You're an early bloomer, baby boy. MOM. And aren't you looking handsome, Hari? She purred. Won't you blush for me? How went your hospital visit? It went well, Hari. Thanks for asking. He woke up long enough to say I do, and then died of his wounds. She sniffled theatrically. I feel his loss keenly. We'd been together almost a month. She smiled suddenly. But I met a nice, rich pureblood who was visiting a relative. Blaze sighed. Right. Good luck with that. Hari offered. I'm going to visit Millie. I sent her a letter a few days ago, and she hasn't replied yet, said Blaze. I'll ask her why. Hey, Millie. Hi, Hari. Millicent said over her shoulder. Do me a favor and hold this guy for me? Hari shrugged and, as Millie walked away from the wall, grasped the large man by the neck, his fingers pale over the bruises of Millie's large hands, and held the man against the brickwork. The terrified look in the man's eyes suggested that seeing the scrawny kid a foot shorter than Millicent Treat holding him off the ground as a casual activity was not doing his nerves any good. Hari watched with interest as Millicent grabbed two men who'd broken legs off of a table and bashed their heads together violently before using them as a pair of clubs to bludgeon several other men into oblivion. He absently adjusted his grip so that he could snap the man's neck if he needed to. Not bad, he said. You might want to work on your technique though. You could probably have knocked that last one out with only one swing if you'd angled it better. Millie shrugged. Then she charged the last man standing and rammed her shoulder into his stomach until his back smashed into a wall with a crunch. I don't get enough practice. She raised her voice, all right lads, it's safe now. As she spoke, she went up to the man Hari was holding and sucker-punched him in the mouth before dusting off her hands. Millie? Yes, Hari? Why are you in jail? My mom said that I'd have more fun here than at home, so she didn't bother to bail me out. Besides, I figured you'd be by sooner or later to get me out if I needed it. All right then. Besides, I slugged an Auror and they took it badly. Why? I was in Diagon Alley a week or so ago when the Aurors started flinging spells. One of them nearly hit me, and so I punched him in the face, and then I was stunned, and the next thing I remember was waking up in a cell. There's a thing. Yeah. I had a cell to myself. The warden said something about having been a guard here a while back and remembering my mother. Millie grinned. He told me that after her first time in jail, he never made her share a cell with anyone because there aren't house elves, and no one likes to clean the stuff off the walls. Makes sense. And my mom is so jealous of me too. Hari watched as a few witches and wizards, who'd entered the room cautiously now went about carefully stunning the people on the ground and stacking them up to the side. "Why is that?" "Thanks, my lady," called over a somewhat portly man. "We'll add it to your tally. Because I'm being paid by the number of riots I break up while here. Compared to my mum, these guys are a cakewalk. After I broke up a riot by accident, they offered to pay me. They have to keep moving me around the jail though, because people don't want to riot after I break it up." Millicent pouted, which was a horrifying sight. Blaze asked why you didn't reply to his letter, Hari said after a moment. "Oh. Right. Prisoners aren't allowed quills." "Why not?" "They're sharp." "And?" "Prisoners aren't allowed things that can be used as weapons. Everything in this room can be used as a weapon. Even the prisoners themselves. You proved that." "Hari, I'm not sure that there is much inherent danger in, for example," she pointed to a bowl that hadn't been upended, butterscotch pudding. "Well, that guy over there is allergic to it," replied Hari, pointing at one of the unconscious prisoners. "Enough to kill him though? And you could force someone to eat so much of it that their stomach explodes. Correct me if I'm wrong, Warden, but I think the guards feel that they would notice before that happened." The portly man nodded and kicked one of the recumbent prisoners a few times to make sure he wasn't faking. Then he produced a hatpin and jabbed it into the man's testicles and nodded in satisfaction when there was no response. "And of course, you could just shove someone's face into it and let them drown. Except for Ron Weasley. He'd eat his way out." "Not to put too fine a point on it," interrupted the warden as he waddled over. "But who in the blazes are you?" "I'm Hari. I'm a friend of Millie, and I was just visiting her." "And how the hell did you get in here?" "Magic." The warden frowned. "I hate that answer. Magic. Anyway, I was going to take her home, but she seems to be having fun, so I'll let her enjoy her vacation." "Do you want me to give your family a message, Millie?" "Just that Mom was right, and she should bribe them to drop the charges when it's time for school." "Okay. I'll give her a punch for you also." Hari vanished in a ball of flame, and the warden blinked. "My lady? What the fuck just happened?" "Hari," replied Millie, as if that explained everything. His visit with Millie's parents had gone well. He'd hit her mother in the jaw hard enough to stun her, those weights were paying off, and told them about when to bribe Millie out of jail. He only had a couple weeks left before school was supposed to begin when a call came in for him. "New Dawn Branch Office, Director Hari speaking." Hari listened to the scratchy voice at the other end of the line, and made a few quick notes to read with his Sharingan so he could memorize them. No survivors. Hari wondered if Claire had come through for him, and this was someone related to her friend. It didn't really matter one way or the other though, because he had a job. The fee was lower than he'd like, but considering this was his first mission in the region, it wasn't too shocking that he couldn't charge full price. Hari boarded the flight to the Congo with amusement. It was funny that they'd searched him for weapons before the flight. It wasn't as though he needed them. On the other hand, what was so funny was the fact that they'd missed the entire arsenal he had on him. No ninja would have been so lax. His cloak drew some comment, but he ignored it as any member of the Akatsuki would and just settled into his seat in coach. He'd brought no magazines, but just closed his eyes and began to read several magazines he'd memorized. Hari hummed as he walked away from the rebel compound. That was unfair. There was no compound, but he was definitely walking away from a place that had one time held a rebel compound, even if the only evidence of that now was a large circle of blackened ground where it had once sat. He'd taken pictures for his employer, and even taken the extra trouble of tracking down any rebels who'd been out of the camp at the time and killed them too. That had taken him a few extra hours. Compared to the time it took to deal with the compound, it was most of the effort. It wasn't the stuff of legends, but it would bring in a nice paycheck considering the work required. It more than covered his flights and would leave him with a pleasant profit besides. And he would hope that he would be called on in future endeavors. Hermione was on the platform, hugging her parents goodbye when she heard an animal yelp. Outtake . Good afternoon, class, said Harry. He sat on his desk, playing with an origami lotus with 1,000 petals. Next to him was a tall, lithe woman with there was no way to get around it, blue hair. This is our guest instructor for the day, my Aunt Conan. The woman gave a slight bow and several people noticed the paper flower tucked behind an ear. Most of the girls were observing the body piercings they could see with confusion. The boys were paying attention to how her top ended well above her navel. If you don't stop drooling, I'm going to hurt you, she growled. Miss? Asked one of the girls. Did the Weasley twins get you? I'm sorry. Your hair. Did they prank you? Nah, replied Harry. My aunt just has a normal hair color. You not so much. The girl in question had blonde hair. Today, class, we will be looking at the weapon possibilities inherent in one of the most ubiquitous objects, paper. Wizards use parchment, commented a Muggleborn. It's still easy to come by and useful. Conan held up a sheet of letter paper. Dangerous? Not so much. She fiddled with it for a moment and then threw the resulting shape, slicing off the ear of a sixth-year who was staring at her and drooling. And yet, I just removed an extremity with it. Harry levitated stacks of paper over to the desks. We're going to be starting with a basic blade form. And remember that it's easier to conjure paper than it is to conjure iron. Dumbledore looked out at a dinner scene much subdued and with most of the diners sporting bandages with healing salves under them. I must thank our recent guest lecturer for her discourse on the methods by which people may be dismembered by use of common materials such as paper. In light of that, I find that I am being lobbied by Filch to add all forms of paper to the list of forbidden items, and it is difficult to argue with his position. While I am impressed by the number of intricate objects many of my students gifted me with, I am nevertheless concerned about the sudden upsurge in injuries today. I think that there are a grand total of 15 students without at least one severe laceration or more serious wounds. This is troubling when we have otherwise had a somewhat injury-free year, petrifications notwithstanding. Additionally, I must announce the death of Beryl Toptower, a 7th-year Gryffindor. The idiot died when he attempted to assault Professor Snape with his new paper-throwing thingy, and his professor responded poorly to attempted murder and exploded his student all over the potions classroom, incidentally causing the ruination of all the potions being prepared by the Newt class at the time. Please, he said to the blue-haired woman, do not ever darken my castle doors again. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.